welcome Pastor as he comes to bring the word.
Well, it's hot outside. Now, there is a hotter place, but you don't want to go there. Anyway, the touch of the Master's hand. The Gospel of Mark is the smallest, and yet it is the most practical of all of the Gospels. Now, most scholars, and I hate to say that because I've never really met a scholar, Bible scholar. I've met a lot of students. I'm still learning. But most agree that the Gospel of Mark is actually the Gospel of Simon Peter, the apostle. It was written by Mark, who was under the training or tutelage of the apostle Peter. Mark was the first of the Gospels that were written. In fact, Matthew and Luke and John all quote from Mark. As I read the Gospel of Mark, the thing that stands out to me is the personal touch. Mark says nothing about no room in the inn, born in a stable. He says nothing about the miraculous birth, nothing about the wise men watching their sheep at night, no story of the shepherds, no story about the angels coming with good news. Mark does not get into the mysterious incarnation. That's God in the form of man. He doesn't even deal with that. He just goes through it. Mark uses the human element. I love the Gospel of Mark. It's my favorite. He uses the personal touch. And time again, he tells about how Jesus touched someone. In the first chapter, he talks about Simon Peter's mother-in-law was sick with a fever. Jesus took her by the hand, lifted her up, the fever left. He touches a leper, and he says, I will, be thou clean. He touches the daughter of Jairus, who was dead, and she lives. Mark tells of little children coming to Jesus so he could touch them. There's a special tenderness about the Gospel of Mark. If you're hungry for something that you don't have, what you need is a touch of the Master's hand. If you're miserable, lonely, frustrated, and life has no joy, what you need is the touch of the Master's hand. If you go to bed at night and toss and turn, live on tranquilizers, what you need is a touch of the Master's hand. Right. If you're sick and the doctors really don't know what to do, you need a touch of the Master's hand. If life is just one boring humdrum after another, you get up in the morning, go to work so you can come home and get in your lazy boy and watch TV till it's time to go to bed, so you can get up in the morning, go to work so you can come home and sit in your lazy boy and watch TV till it's time to go to... Life is dull. It's boring. What you need is a touch of the Master's hand. Now, Christianity may be dead, dull, boring, lifeless, listless, hopeless, and useless for some people. But that's not what I got. Amen. And that's not what Jesus gives. And if that's what you've got, what you need is a touch of the Master's hand. A touch can mean so much. Time of sorrow. Maybe someone has lost a loved one and a friend comes. What are you going to say? Words are just too cheap. You say, I'm sorry. Well, so you're sorry. But words are just cheap. Sometimes there's nothing you can say. But sometimes you put an arm around them or pat them on the shoulder. You don't have to say a word. And that touch means more than anything you could have said. How about the touch of a little child? Who can describe that? Little girl sitting on her grandfather's knee as he read her a story, and every once in a while she'd reach up and touch his face. And then she'd touch her own face. And this went on for a while. She'd just reach up and rub his face. And she said, Grandpa, did God make you? He said, yes, honey, he made me a long time ago. She said, well, Grandpa, did God make me? He said, yes, honey, God made you not very long ago. She went silent for a few seconds and she said, God's doing a better job now, isn't he? How can you describe the touch of a little hand on your cheek? How can you express the feeling of a little hand wrapped around your finger, toddling along, totally dependent on you to care, love, and protect them? I used to let my kids hold my finger until we would come to a place where we were crossing a road or something, and then I would just hold their hand. They thought they were holding mine, but I was holding their hand. I wish all of you would go home and read the Gospel of Mark. How can you describe the words of a child saying, Daddy, hold my hand? What about a handshake or a hug? I wonder how much we would miss a handshake and a hug if we were where we couldn't touch each other. That would be a sad, sad thing. I'm a hugger. I tell people, if you don't like hugs, don't come to the sheep shed. Find you someplace else to go. We're huggers around here. You probably get a hug, several before you leave. You walk in the door, there'll be several people hug you before you leave. The touch can mean so much. You know, a lot of times in times of discouragement, decision, times that I didn't know what to do, and Joe would just reach over and take my hand. Didn't say a word. Just communication by touch. You married couples, you always fussing at each other? Do you know every time you do that, you leave a little cut, a little scar? It's like the old Chinese death by 1,000 cuts. You just slowly bleed to death. You're just constantly fussing. What in the name of heaven is the matter with you? The greatest touch of all, and by far the most loving, better than a loving touch touch of a wife or a friend or a little child, the greatest touch of all is the touch of the Master's hand. Jesus touched a leper one day, and he said, I will be thou clean, and he was clean. Of all of the Gospels, Mark mentions the touch over and over and over, how Jesus touched someone. He touched a madman at Gadarene and he was made sane. He touched blind eyes. Actually, this is interesting to me. He'll give you a little sidelight, let you breathe a breath or two. 3 times, Jesus healed some man that was blind. The first time, he spoke to the guy, and his eyes were opened. The next guy, he touched his eyes, and his eyes were open. The third time, he reached down, got him some dust, and spit in his hand, and made a little mud spitball, and put it on the guy's eyes and told him to go wash it off. And he could see. Now, if that was today, people that saw him speak to the guy, they'd go out and start to speak and be healed church. People that saw him touch the guy, they'd go out and start to touch and be healed church. And the people that saw him spit and make a mud ball and put on his eyes, they'd go out and start to spit and mud ball church. That's just the way we are. As you read the Gospel of Mark, pay attention to 2 things, and I'm going to preach short today, be a short sermon. As you read the Gospel, I wish you'd go home and read it. It's only 16 chapters. Read it in just a little while. Read the Gospel of Mark this week and pay attention to 2 things. Number 1, the people that Jesus touched. And number 2, the power of the touch. What happened to them when he touched them? So I'm going to look at those 2 things very briefly. The people Jesus touched. In chapter 1, Mark 1, verses 30 and 31, the first person that Jesus touched was Simon Peter's mother-in-law. Now, she was sick with a fever. She couldn't get up. He takes her by the hand, lifts her up, and immediately the fever left. She's healed, and she goes and she's able to minister to all of the people. Now, Peter could not have been the first pope because he had a mother-in-law. If he had a mother-in-law, it means he had to have a wife. You may as well breathe. Peter was a married man, and his mother-in-law was sick. Jesus touched her, and she was made whole. Ladies, if there is anybody that really needs a touch, the personal touch of Jesus, it's our mothers. Mothers who rock the babies to sleep at night. Mothers who get up in the middle of the night to feel a fevered brow. Mothers who miss a lot of sleep. Thank God for Christian mothers who get up on Sunday morning with everything they've got to do and get the kids ready and take them to church so they can have a background. You know, that's good. I think we should give our mothers a hand. I miss my mother. Still in chapter 1 of Mark, the second person he touched was a leper, verse 40 and 41, Mark 1. Now the thing is, nobody touched a leper. When a leper met someone on the road, the leper had to get off of the road, cover his face, and cry, "Unclean, unclean!" Nobody could touch a leper. If he was married, he never felt the kiss of his wife. He never got to hold her hand or feel her touch. If he was a father, he never felt the touch of a child, never got a good night kiss from his kids. He was a leper. Nobody could shake hands with a leper. Nobody could even get close to him. He couldn't go to church and greet one another, shake hands, give them a hug. Here was a leper. It had been a long time since he had felt the touch of anybody's hand. And he meets Jesus. And the leper runs out. He'd heard about Jesus. He bows down, gets down on his knees, and begs him, he says, "If you will, you can make me clean." Jesus reaches out and touches him and says, "I will. Be clean." And the man is clean. His leprosy is gone. A touch. Thank God Jesus still touches the unclean people. Your friends, even your family may have given up on you, but nobody is too unclean and nobody is too far in sin for Jesus to touch them. If no one else cares about you, Jesus does. If no one else, yeah, give him a hand. That's good. That's okay. If no one else will ever pat you on the back and brag on you, Jesus will. He says, "I will lift you out of the miry clay, and I'll set your feet on a rock." Jesus loves the unlovely. I'm thankful for that. While we were yet sinners, he loved us. While we were yet unlovable, he loved us anyway. You know, you really ought to thank God every day of your life that you belong to a church where everybody's welcome. Now, we don't condone sin, and you know I will preach against sin. I'll preach against what God says to preach against. But the fact is, sinners are welcome here. And we won't judge you. We won't condone what you do, but we won't judge you either. Jesus always had time for the unlovely. A lame man, lame for 38 years, Jesus had time for him. The lady who had been married 5 times and was just shacking up with a guy, she was too ashamed and embarrassed to come to get water in the morning when the ladies would come to get water. She waited till the heat of the day to come to the well because she didn't want to have to listen to the gossip of the women. Jesus even stopped a parade one day to speak to a little tax collector who was climbed up a tree so he could get a glimpse of Jesus. And Jesus just stopped the parade and said, "Zacchaeus, come down here. I'm going over to your house to have dinner. I'm going to go eat with you today." Jesus always had time for the down and outers, people nobody else cared about. He loved the unlovely, and he cares when nobody else does. And Jesus touched little children. In Mark 5, I'm still in Mark. Mark 5, verse 41 says, Jesus touched a little girl. daughter of Jairus, who was dead, and she lived. And Mark tells how little children would come to Jesus so he could touch them. And he said, when the disciples tried to stop the kids from coming to him, he said, let them alone. Let them come to me, for such is the kingdom of heaven. I love kids. I make it a point to always give them a big hug. If you've ever seen me give kids a hug, we always count to 3. We hug and we say 1, 2, 3, and then we can. I always tell them I love them. I get more kids' hugs than anybody in this 4-state area, I imagine. And sometimes they will write me notes. And if they're too young to write me notes, they'll draw me pictures. I read every note several times. Keep them in my Bible for a while. I keep the pictures for a long time. I'll tell you how I started all that. Little girl, about 6 years old, she rode our buses, one of our buses at Central years ago. She came up to me one day, and I gave her a hug. And I told her how pretty she was. And I bragged on her hair. I said, your hair is lovely. You are a beautiful young lady. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, I wish you were my daddy. I lost it. I lost it. And ever since then, I've made it a point. I will hug every young person I can hug. I'll give them a big hug. There are many times that Jesus touched. He touched a devil-possessed man, and he was free. He healed the sick, opened deaf ears, made blind to see, made the lame to walk, and nobody, I said nobody was ever touched by the Master's hand who walked away the same person that they were. Let's look quickly at the power of the touch. Peter's mother-in-law was sick with a fever. Jesus took her by the hand, lifted her up. Fever was gone. She was healed, and she was able to feed and minister to Jesus and to the apostles. He touched a girl that was dead, and she lived. He touched a madman, and he was made sane. The deaf could hear, the blind could see, the sick were made whole. The whole point of what I'm trying to say, whatever you need today, you need first of all the touch of the Master's hand. He said, I came to heal the brokenhearted and to set captives free. He came to seek and to save that which was lost. If your life is on the rocks, He wants to change your life and put you on the rock. You can try everything else, but when you get up in the morning, the problem will still be there until you make Jesus Christ the Lord and Master of your life. He lives, and we live in this sin-sick world, church. We need Jesus in our lives, in our homes, and we need Him in our churches. The touch of the Master's hand. That craving that you feel in your heart will never be satisfied by a new car, new house, new clothes, and it'll never be satisfied by a new husband or a new wife. If you can't live with the one you got, what makes you think you can live with the one you don't have? Peace and joy will never be found in a bottle, and it'll never be found in a pill. They that hunger and thirst after righteousness shall be filled. I want to read you a poem. 'Twas battered and scarred, and the auctioneer thought it scarcely worth his time to waste much time on the old violin. But he held it up with a smile. "What am I bid, good folks?" he cried. "Who'll start the bidding for me? $1? $1? Who'll make it $2? $2? Who'll make it $3? $3? $3 once, $3 twice, and going, but no." From the room far back, an old gray-haired man came forward and picked up the bow. Wiping the dust from the old violin and tightening up all of the strings, he played a melody pure and sweet as the angels sing. The music ceased, and the auctioneer, with a voice that was quiet and low, said, "What am I bid for the old violin?" And he held it up with a bow. $1,000? $1,000? Who will make it $2? $2,000? Who will make it $3? $3,000? 3,000 once, 3,000 twice, and going and gone, said he. The people cheered, but the foolish crowd never quite understood what had changed the worth of the old violin was the touch of the master's hand. Whatever you need today, you need a touch. Some of you came in here with needs. Some of you came in here with broken hearts. Some of you came in here with sickness that the doctors doesn't know what to do with. But whatever your need is today, you need a touch of the Master's hand. What can change your life? What can change the value of who you are? The touch of the Master's hand.